we got to convince them that Master Chief is dead. So we went through the whole presentation and we got to that ending scene. I remember the Microsoft brass just white as sheets.
Watching all the behind the scenes documentaries and stuff and the making of the Halo games and whatnot, you very much get that sort of familial sense that everyone had with one another. There was good banter.
I look back on it and realize how good we actually had it. You know, there is a real change to what Bungie felt like, what Bungie did. The Vidoc days that everybody thinks of fondly, those days were over.
Hello everyone, and welcome to The Infinite Show. I am here with a very, very special guest. You may know him, you just might. He goes by the name Marty O'Donnell.
It's a pleasure to be here. Darcy and Andrew. I'm going to be calling you Darcy and Andrew throughout this show, so just to mess with people's minds.
Well, Marty, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm not going to waste any time diving straight into the questions, though. I would love to know what some of your earliest memories were that you think sparked your love of music.
Oh, music. Well, that goes back many, many years when I was probably, my earliest memories are walking through the living room and putting my hand up above my head to touch the piano keys, just hearing what that sounded like. And my mom was a piano teacher and she played the piano really well. So I fell in love with the piano from my earliest memories and got to start, I think my mom started teaching me some stuff when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And then she went and took me to get piano lessons with a real piano teacher when I was 7, and basically never looked back. That, and then I think I remember my father he used to bring home albums of music that he loved, and he was a disc jockey at one point in his life and did big band stuff and actually met a lot of the people. He met Count Basie and Stan Kenton. So I grew up listening to music that he had. And then he would bring home film scores. So I remember when he brought home a film score for the movie Ben-Hur, which I believe was in 1959. So I probably heard it in 1960 or something. It might have been 5 years old. And I just fell in love with the emotional power of that score. And that might have been my first exposure to big orchestral scores, and then when I was more formally trained, I would listen to Bach and Beethoven and Mahler and Mozart and all the rest of and Brahms. Yeah, and then in my high school years, I got more into rock and roll, and then fusion and progressive rock and all of that kind of stuff. So
and start your own band as well.
I played flute, believe it or not.
It's a great instrument.
But I'm glad I played flute because I learned a lot about writing for woodwinds, and it's good to know how to play more than one instrument.
It's a lovely instrument, yeah.
Yeah. I suppose, speaking about music as well, and how you sort of leaned into the rock side of things, obviously you got to collaborate with Sir Paul McCartney, which is a massive, massive deal. Can you tell us a little bit about that and specifically what the creative process was while working with Sir Paul? Yeah,
well, it's funny. I was a bit of a music snob growing up, and I was not a Beatles fan, other than there was a look that I liked. So I tried to look like Paul McCartney as a sixth grader. I was always kind of dismissive of especially some of the early Beatles stuff. And then at some point, probably my senior year in high school, I finally listened to Abbey Road and realized that these guys were geniuses. And then I went back through the catalog and became a definite, Beatles fan for life. And then when Mike Salvatore and I started working together, we were both fans of the Beatles. Everybody in our generation knows every Beatles song. So we used to make a joke about when we had a person who sort of answered the phone for us in the studio. We would, at certain points, we would say, "Hold all calls unless it's Paul McCartney." So that was the joke. Yeah, it was a real honor to work with Paul. He's a sweet guy, genuine, creative. Everything is gut with Paul. Everything comes from instinct. So, which is the same with Mike Salvatore. Mike doesn't have, formal music training. which was good for me because every time I wanted to win an argument with Mike, I could always pull out my master's degree. And then he would say something that was undeniably true and came from his gut, and I'd have to give in. So it was a good relationship. But Paul was the same way. Paul sort of reveled in the fact that he would say, I don't read music. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I've heard the stories. I get it. But yeah, it was really fun to work with Paul, trade ideas back and forth and wait for him to send us stuff. And the way it happened, the way we even got to meet him was such a fluke. The guy who was in Hollywood who used to get us connected with some of the actors, a guy named Lev Chapelsky, he would, if I said, hey, I need to get a hold of Nathan Fillion, is that possible? He would say, yeah, I got connections. And he would set up, these back channel connections with Keith David and Nathan Fillion and Katie Sackhoff and, Julie Benz and all these Michael Wincott, all these people. And he knew that on Halo 2 that I'd worked with Incubus and Breaking Benjamin and Steve Vai. Those guys, those musicians came to me through Nile Rodgers, who was a music producer. But Lev came to me and said, hey, we were sitting around now that you're done with Halo and you're moving on to Destiny. We were sitting around here in the office saying, what musician should Marty work with next? And we decided that you should work with Paul McCartney. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Geez, are you kidding? I'd love to work with Paul McCartney. What sort of connection do you have with Paul McCartney? And he said, we don't have any connection. And I'm like, oh, well, thanks for putting that thought in my head. I mean, it was like, what is the deal? And he said, yeah, but wouldn't that be cool? And I'm like, well, yeah, Lev, of course it'd be cool, but there's no chance that's going to happen. And he goes, yeah, I think it could happen. And so fast forward like 2 months, I'm at Game Developers Conference. I'm about to go on stage. Actually, I was already on stage to do a keynote for both game design and audio. So I was doing the game design / audio keynote at Game Developers Conference. Just about to go to the podium, and the guy is up there introducing me. And Lev just grabs, says, Marty, I got you a meeting. And I'm like, what? A meeting for what? And he goes, I got you a meeting with Paul McCartney. I'll talk to you after your talk. And then, the other guy goes, and now Marty O'Donnell is here to speak about... And my brain was just fried. I couldn't remember anything that I was going to talk about. All I was thinking was, he just told me I'm going to have a meeting with Paul McCartney. I have no idea how that talk went, but I know I was completely distracted the whole time. But yeah, sure enough, like a month later, I flew down to Los Angeles to have my 20-minute meeting with Paul McCartney. And he came in, very nice, and we started talking, and I gave him my presentation, and he kept talking. And we were told that he was only going to be there for 20 minutes. And after about 2 hours, I started thinking maybe this was good because he was still there. And so at the end of that whole thing, I got up to shake hands, and instead he just came over and gave me a big hug. And I thought, okay, that's a good first date, and let's see what happens. So yeah, it turned out great.
Yeah.
Because you've obviously had a long-standing sort of relationship with lots of different composers and collaborated with them. Obviously, Incubus, Breaking Benjamin, Sir Paul McCartney. Is there a composer or an artist that you've always wanted the chance to collaborate with, but maybe haven't had the opportunity to?
Well, there you go. You stumped me. I as a musician, I would have loved to at some point had Yo-Yo Ma play something that I wrote. He's just, his ability to play the cello is unsurpassed, and it would be amazing to work with him. Composers, that's a tough one because, trust me, it's hard to collaborate on compositions. And the fact that I came up with Music of the Spheres, and I came up with the themes for everything, but then, I brought Mike in to really help sort of flesh it out. And that was a tradition of me and Mike working together that, had developed over 30 years. But then to also then have Paul McCartney be part of that, that was that was uncharted territory for both of us, and we had no clue how that might work. As a matter of fact, when I was first talking to Paul, he had been asked to do a movie score one time, and then halfway through it, a director came in and said, here's this other composer you're going to be working with, and he was like, wait a minute, you don't tell me who I work with. I could work with Bob Dylan if I want. I worked with John Lennon, you know. And so I took that as a little clue, like, okay, if he's going to work with us, it's because he's going to do some cool stuff and give it to us. Over the course of actually starting to work with him, he would send us ideas and I would send them back. At one point, in that very first meeting, I actually even told him about this bigger concept that I had called Music of the Spheres, and he seemed very interested in it. So later on this was at Capitol Records in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. I was there to meet Paul, and we worked just the two of us alone in this room in the main studio, and I was at the piano, and I was showing him stuff that we were doing with some of the themes that he had sent us to work with. And in the middle of that, he goes, yeah, but what about that Music of the Spheres thing that you were doing? I'd love to know about that. And I sort of froze. I just stopped talking for a second because I was thinking, what exactly does he want to do? Because I said, Paul, look, I don't know the way you want to work because you're like one of the most amazing collaborators of all time, but you're also an amazing solo artist. So I'm not sure how you want to work with us. And he said, oh, I would love to give you some of my music and you combine it with your music and then it becomes our music. And that's when I realized, okay, this is going to work. He actually wants to truly collaborate and was giving us the freedom to, mess with his stuff and put it into our stuff and make it a true collaboration. And that was very freeing at that moment. So I immediately was able to sit at the piano and say, hey, well, the first piece that I got has these themes in it. It's called the Path, and it goes like this. And this theme that you gave me, I could put right here in this way. So that's how we went from there. So my point is, collaborating with another composer is not an easy thing. It's not just, oh, hey, I'm just going to talk to Hans Zimmer and say, let's do something together. And that's just, it's, as cool as that might be in your imagination, it could be very dangerous. So
Bungie's been in the news quite a lot lately, and the company and its approach to making games has quite significantly changed, it seems, compared to what it was 10, 15 years ago. What do you think was the secret behind Bungie's success in those early years and in the Camelot era, as you kind of call it?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me in hindsight is, and I've talked about this in other places, but I look back on the 10-year period of working on all the Halos, and even prior to that, working on Myth, The Fallen Lords, and Soul Blighter. So that was a Camelot period for me. I look back on it and realize how good we actually had it. And there really wasn't that much, especially you would think that Microsoft would have been more interfering with our process, but they actually weren't. And I think it was because what we were doing was so foreign to what Microsoft was good at. So we were sort of, especially for the first, 7, 8 years within Microsoft, we were pretty in a bubble. The first executive, Ed Fries, who engineered the purchase of Bungie, he really respected the creative process and was hands-off and allowed us to have our own space, allowed us to have our own keys. So nobody else, even Bill Gates couldn't come into our studio, without us actually physically letting him in. That's a true story. We physically had to open the locked doors to let Bill Gates in. So we were pretty free to work on the Halo IP, even though we didn't own the IP. We didn't own that intellectual property, but we were free to do what we wanted. So I look back on that, and I didn't really need to have more than 20, 30% of my time writing music, because I didn't think that was my main value to Bungie as a team and Halo as a game. I had a more holistic view, and I was happy to work on everything we worked on and everything I worked on. And then when we got into the sort of business side of it, I'd had my own business for, decades already. So I was able to talk to these young Bungie guys and say, hey, look, guys, if you really want to be successful, we need to own the intellectual property. And we sold Halo. We're not going to ever get that back. So let's figure out a way to own our own property going into the future and get our independence back. I was happy. That was actually energizing to work on that stuff. It was fun. The unfun parts actually came later when we made a deal with Activision.
Oh dear.
You know, all the people out there are thinking, how could you make a deal with Activision? Well, I'll tell you. I mean, you look at
$1 jillion.
Yeah, well, it was $1 jillion, number one. But when you think about how much money we were saying needed to fund the 10 years of Destiny that we planned, when you think about how much money we were looking at, we didn't have that many people to partner with. It was either going to be Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo, Activision, or EA. Nobody, not another publisher in the business or developer had the kind of deep pockets except for those. Nintendo fell through. Microsoft made a really, really good pitch. Now, remember, like I said, when we were pitching the future of Bungie and Destiny, it was like, Bungie is independent. You can't buy us. And we own the IP. So all we were looking for was a publishing deal. Yeah, Sony couldn't quite pull the trigger at that moment. Microsoft just couldn't do it. They were like willing to make a sweeter deal, except they wanted to own the intellectual property. And that was a non-negotiable for us. Activision was the only company that had the money and said, you own the intellectual property and we won't interfere. They gave us the money. We owned the intellectual property, but they interfered. I was pretty much isolated. I was the only person on the board that was mad in my memory. So I was the only person on the board that started arguing about Activision's interference in our process, in our creative process. That's when I started having differences of opinion with people on the board. And then during that whole process, some of my compatriots from Bungie, like Joe Staten and Marcus Lato and Paul Breton and Jamie Griesmer, one by one, they were all gone. And I realized I was probably going to be the next one to go. Well, I was proud to have finished the Music of the Spheres and have that thing completed. And by the time we were recording, I think we recorded in November of 2012. And we were at Abbey Road Studios with a 120-piece orchestra and a 40-voice choir and a boys choir. And then Paul McCartney came in the last day to do his stuff. And I mean, it was just, we were there like for 4 days. And I don't think it could get any better than that for me. So that was great. And I was happy to have had that ability to do the music for Destiny 1, Music of the Spheres for Destiny 1, and actually accomplish that. And then about a little over a year later, that was the end of that. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the sort of the golden age or the Camelot era of Bungie, looking back on that time, is there a particular story or memory that stands out to you, something you've always wanted to share but maybe haven't had the opportunity to yet?
You know, I've spoken at so many points in time, and I've shared so many different stories, thinking about, like, is there a story I haven't shared? What I would say is, in general, there's a story that I think I might have shared at some point, but people might not know this one. But I remember when we finished Halo 1, you know, when we were purchased by Microsoft in 2000, and like 34 of us, you know, were transported out to Seattle. It was a small team. And then, you know, the testers were testing Halo, and that was a new thing for Bungie. We didn't usually have an external team of testers. But, you know, we were a little suspicious about this whole test process, and we became good friends with the testers. I remember Jamie Griesmer just loved the test lab. He was like, this is what we've needed. You know, this is so good. And all those testers now are veterans, you know, as engineers and designers inside Bungie. But I remember when we were working on Halo 2, about halfway through Halo 2, my wife asked me, you know, how many people are working at Bungie now? And I thought, gee, I don't know. Let me think. And so in my head, I walked around the studio and named everybody, and then kept count of who I was naming. And I named everybody from memory as I mentally walked around the studio. I think I got to, like, you know, 76 people or 82 people, whatever it was. And she was like, wow, that's a lot of people. And I'm like, yeah, I'm surprised we're, you know, this big now. That's huge. And that was probably the last time I was able to do that, because Bungie just slowly grew bigger and bigger. By the time we were working on Halo 3, I think we were 130 people or something, which, as you guys might know, is in today's AAA development is shockingly small. That feeling of sort of family where you could name everybody and everybody knew each other and everybody had multiple tasks and, you know, super talented and also had insight into other things. I mean, it was just a really wonderful sort of family, small company feel. And then I remember towards the end of my time at Bungie, we had this big 3-4-story building in Bellevue, Washington. Had an elevator that went down to the parking garage. And one night I got into the elevator to go home. This is, I bet you, 2 months before I was fired. This other guy got in and I said, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Are you new at Bungie?" And he goes, "Oh, no, I've been working here for about 1.5 years." And I remember thinking, oh, goodness sakes, somebody's been working here 1.5 years and I don't even know them. And he says, "Do you work at Bungie? What do you do?" And I thought, oh, okay, that's the way it is now. Like, I don't know him and he doesn't know me. He doesn't know anything about, you know, what I've contributed in the past. And I really, at that moment, I thought, yeah, I think that side of Bungie is now, that book is closed. That chapter's over, right? So that was a sad feeling.
Yeah, that kind of hit me in the feels a little bit because, I mean, like, watching all the behind-the-scenes documentaries and stuff and the making of the Halo games and whatnot, you very much get that sort of familial sense that everyone had with one another. There was good banter. Yeah, but that would have felt like a punch to the gut. That's rough.
Yeah, it really did. And I remember thinking at the time, I knew I was on my last few weeks. But so when that happened in the elevator going down, I realized, wow, there is a real change to what Bungie felt like, what Bungie did. The Vidoc days that everybody thinks of fondly, those days were over. That doesn't mean it got bad. It just means those days were over and something completely different and new started happening. But that's the way it felt for me. That elevator ride was the end of an era for me. So.
On the topic of sort of former Bungie devs and people that you worked with, I'm going to hit you with a slightly different question. Give a one-word summary for each one of these names. So for each one of these developers or people that you worked with. So I'll start you off with a good one. Alex Seropian.
Oh, the man.
The man, I like that. Jason Jones.
Boy genius.
Boy genius, okay, like Jimmy Neutron.
It might be 2 words, I'm sorry. But
no, that's okay, yeah. Joe Staten.
Hilarious, creative. Yeah, I just got to say, Joe had the sharpest tongue in the studio. He could just tear people to shreds with like 3 sentences. I sat in marketing meetings where, you know, Microsoft suits were sitting across the table, and I was almost embarrassed for them when Joe would tear into one of those guys.
Next name, Sheik Wang.
Incredible artist, just incredible creative.
Jay Wyland.
Oh, the most solid second in command ever. Like you couldn't have a better guy to have your back.
Here's a bit of a controversial one, so I'll let you finish your drink first. Pete Parsons.
Yeah, sorry, we can't repeat those words on YouTube.
Yep.
Oh, wait, I said nothing.
Yeah, no, he just, you know, some of it went down the wrong way. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Steve Downs.
A bud. He is just a longtime buddy. You know, I enjoyed working with him on the very first project we did, which was a game called Subterracore. And, you know, I just couldn't get his voice out of my head. So I'm so glad that I went back to have him be Master Chief. But he's such a buddy. I still see him at shows and stuff. And we just had dinner a few months ago together. And he's just great. He's a buddy.
And another voice actor, Jen Taylor.
A sweetheart. Just absolute sweetheart, super talented actress. Yeah, she's a sweetheart. I watched her on stage. She is so versatile, and yeah, she can do anything. She can literally do anything. She's great.
And another Bungie dev, Paul Bertone.
Yeah, rock solid. He's probably the most organized designer I've ever met. His ability to systemically come up with, processes and systems for game design is unparalleled. He's amazing.
And someone who we've also had on the show somewhat recently, Niles Sankey.
Yeah, Niles is salt of the earth. He is just a rock solid, creative designer. Like I still think of him as the new guy. What did he come in?
Halo 3, I believe.
Well, certainly Halo 3 did, but he come in at the end of Halo 2, or was he just Halo 3?
I think so, yeah.
I think it was Halo 3, and then he was a main driver on Reach. Super dependable, super creative. I really enjoyed working with Niles. He and I have kept a relationship up to this day, so that's fun.
And one more as well, Max Hoberman.
Oh. Yeah, Max is and amazingly organized, and I think he's a really good leader. It's funny, when he left, the Halo 2 multiplayer was, and the entire system that became sort of the foundational way people thought of console, internet multiplayer, online stuff, that all came out of Max's head. And, I think he's a really good leader of his company. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Max and his team do. Like, if they really get their hands on some their own intellectual property and their own IP to develop into the future, it could be pretty amazing. But yeah, he's a rock solid guy. You're not going to ask me about Jamie Griesmer?
Oh, yeah, no, actually, no, that's another good one.
He's a slime ball. Okay, no, seriously, Jamie is my favorite designer of all time. He is a jack of all trades. He is fearless, and he is the only one who I consistently lose arguments with. I've argued with Joe Staten, I've argued with Paul Bertone, and half the time I might come out ahead. But with Jamie, he's just impossible, because he's right. He's almost just plain always right, no matter what it is. He is just amazing. He would do anything to get himself wedged into Bungie, and he did. And he hugely important to the history of what you guys like, which is the Halo universe.
Well, we can send that to him, because I think we've always wanted to try and get him on the show.
Well, I will. Yeah. I can talk to him. He tends to. He and I did a show once, 10 or 12 years ago. I don't know what it was, Game Informer or something, but he and I were together on some show. So he does do interviews. He's also a great speaker. Like, when he puts together his presentations at GDC, Game Developers Conference, are the absolute best. They're just mind-blowing. His college, he was like a triple major in college. He was physics, philosophy, and math, which is insane. But I have always believed that those three degrees makes the best game designer ever. Some of my most frustrating moments were with Jamie, because at the end of when we were in crunch, he was still tweaking stuff that would affect us. Like, okay, is this weapon done? Yeah, this weapon's done. It's in the can. It's been tested. It's great. So all the sound design and all the effects and all the reload animations and how many frames it took to fire and overheat, all that stuff was all figured out. And then we were moving on to, the next big project inside the game. And we come back and the plasma rifle had changed again, or the pistol had changed again. The rate of weapon fire on the AR had changed, and it's like that screwed up our sound, and it caused us all this work. I'm like, Jamie, tell me when you're done, please, for the love of God, so we can just put it to bed. And he goes, yeah, Marty, I'm never done. There was nothing I could say. He was never done. It was shipped, and he still wanted to tweak.
No, absolutely.
I mean, I think that's kind of true of any creative work. Creative work, it's never really done.
Well, like, that's what's good about shipping, or what used to be good about shipping, is that you shipped a completed project and you couldn't do anything about it after the fact. And then, games as a service came in and ruined the entire industry.
Yeah.
In all honesty, there's a good side to games as a service, but there's also a downside. And the downside is people never feel like they actually have to polish something and be, say, hey, this is what we're shipping. They're always like, well, we could always change it after day one, and we could, do updates, and we could fix things based on fan input. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just it just causes these publishers to allow developers to release unfinished products. And I don't think that's fair to the fans at all. I really don't.
No, I think we're well and truly in that camp as well. Yeah, we've been burnt one too many times by unfinished games. Halo Infinite. Sorry, I got something stuck in my throat there. I think it's just a cold that's going around. On the topic of Halo, we all know that you were famously the man who killed Sergeant Johnson.
I knew you were going there. I didn't think he had to stay dead. I just wanted him dead for a while. So like, that's my fault.
What are maybe some lesser known contributions that you made to help shape Halo's story that were similar to Sergeant Johnson's death? Maybe.
Yeah, there's certainly nothing as impactful as Sergeant Johnson's death. I didn't realize that at the time. His death was, I thought, would be. Like, I've told this story before, but like, in general, we wanted Halo 3 to be the end of this trilogy, and we thought the best way to end it would be to have Master Chief die. We really all agreed that wouldn't that be great to have Master Chief go out in a blaze of glory, some sacrificial, wonderful thing, and that was the end of Master Chief. But at some point, we realized that would cause such a problem for the future and for Microsoft's ability to monetize the franchise that we had to figure out something else. But we still wanted the fans to get to the end of Halo 3 and think maybe Master Chief was dead. I was completely unconvinced, as I've said in other interviews, that the outline of the story that we had at a certain point would ever make people feel that Master Chief was dead, because nobody important died. But so I had this list of things that I needed to see happen in Halo 3. And it wasn't just Sergeant Johnson dying. It was things like, believe it or not, Miranda Keyes was not coming back, and Lord Hood was not coming back for Halo 3. So I'm like, we have to have Lord Hood. We have to have Miranda. And then we have to have these people dying so that when you actually as a player believe that, wow, maybe Bungie actually is going to kill off Master Chief. I don't know if the story had been spoiled for you when you played it the first time, but when we were able to do the final cinematic with Lord Hood and the Arbiter talking, and were it so easy, and you saw 117 scratched into the monument. I really wanted people to think that was it. I wanted people to think that Master Chief hadn't made it. And I don't know how many people did. It'd be interesting to find that out if first-time players actually had the feeling that Master Chief was dead. So this was after, like, Pete Parsons was gone. We hadn't actually gained our independence entirely yet, but we were on the path to be an independent studio. Harold and I were essentially in charge of the studio, but we had to make a story presentation to the Microsoft brass, and it was really nice. I had music scoring it. CJ had done this cool cinematic video thing. I think Michel Bastien was there to explain the production side. So we were doing this presentation so that they would feel that Bungie had a good handle on what Halo 3 was going to be. Because I'm a mean person, I did this thing where I told Michelle and CJ, I said, we got to convince them that Master Chief is dead. And if we can convince them that he's dead, this will be great. So we went through the whole presentation, and we got to that ending scene, and it was all like storyboards and animatics in a PowerPoint presentation with music playing. And I had the final music swelling, and then we showed that there was going to be a 117 on the thing, and the 41 gun salute at the end, the whole thing. And then we faded to black, and the music swelled and was all emotional, and then everything stopped. It was all over. And then I got up and turned the lights on in the room, and I remember the Microsoft brass just white as sheets. I mean, their mouths were open, and they looked at us. And they looked at me, and I was sort of like waiting for them to say something, and they just couldn't say anything. but I knew that they were like, oh gosh, you just killed off our money maker. And I said, wait, I'm sorry, there's still one more scene. So I turned the lights back off, and then we showed them the coda. They laughed a little bit, but it was a very nervous laugh, which, it probably sounds funny to you guys, because it almost sounds like we were writing the story based on, how to spite Microsoft, which is not true. I think what we ended up with was a really, really good ending to the trilogy. And, we left it open for like anybody who wants to pick up the mantle after Master Chief and Cortana are in there. I mean, because we couldn't avoid probably the best final line that I had ever heard in a video game up to that point, which is, "Wake me when you need me." I just love that. And like, I could not do that. That had to be in there. So I didn't write that line, by the way. I've gotten this wrong in the past. It was either Joe Staton or Rob Stokes. Yeah. So it was one of those funny things where Rob and Joe worked together on that script, which was not a marriage made in heaven. We ended up getting another guy, Peter O'Brien, who ended up being the writer for Reach. So we brought Peter O'Brien back. He was a Hollywood screenwriter. He still is. They needed someone sort of to be in an editorial position and help them work together. And he was really, really good. But that was writing the Halo 3 script was not an easy process. CJ and I were involved, because CJ's the cinematics guy. Lee Wilson's was our storyboard guy. And I cast the actors and we did table reads of the scripts and stuff. And I remember there was some arguments. Believe it or not, there was a huge argument about were it so easy. And it was another one of those things where I love little things like, oh, he says were it so easy at the beginning, and then he says were it so easy at the end. And it's it comes full circle. And there's a duality, there's a dual meaning to that phrase. So I think Rob Stokes might have actually written "Were It So Easy," but he was really mad about the way it was used at the end, in the end scene. He didn't think it was right. He didn't think it made sense. And I've seen people talk about how it doesn't make sense, but it just feels right to me. So I was one of the guys who insisted it stay in that way.
Yeah, I think at some point storytelling exceeds logic,
Yeah, exactly.
The rule of cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you heard about, there's this guy called CinemaSins, and he kind of affected how people critique movies, so they have to be all logical and stuff.
Yeah.
Or not caring about what actually matters, which is the storytelling and the emotions you kind of are able to get out of people.
No, I like that. That's my approach too. Which is why, of course, as you know, the Forerunners are human. So let's not even talk about it.
So that is just a fact.
Yeah,
that's the end of that.
Yeah. I guess on the topic of the Forerunners, originally there was Halo 2's cut ending that was sort of supposed to reveal the Forerunners as humans. And we all know what its development was like, as we say in Australia. It was a bit like being up ship creek without a paddle.
We see that here too, by the way.
Yeah. What was it like composing the music for Halo 2 and some of the sound design for that game? Was it as chaotic as the rest of the development seemingly was?
Yeah, it probably was at least as chaotic. The nice thing about music is its music is malleable. So I've talked about this in really old Vidocs, right? Where I talk about how music it tells a story. It tells a musical story, or it tells an emotional story. And then if you can line that up with an actual story, it can help enhance and further the emotional journey of the actual story. But what's nice is that the emotional story of music can be, oh, it didn't work there, or we cut that scene. I bet you I could use that music again in this other scene in some other modified way. So it's on the music side, that's the easiest. The dialogue and transitions and sound design and level design, that's where most of the confusion came in. I had plenty of music to work with that I could repurpose based on, things changing out from under me as we were working. So music was never the thing that worried me. It was funny, at Bungie, there were lots of people on the team that were always worried about the music. They were like, Marty, when are you going to start writing music? And I'm like, why are you asking me this? I'll get it done when I need to. Don't worry about it. So they always saw me as waiting till the last minute to write music. Frankly, writing music and implementing music was the easiest and essentially fastest part of my job. It was everything else that could get really complex and get screwed up. So I had my most amount of self-confidence on the music side. I still remember a producer coming to me towards the end of Reach, and he's like, there's no music in the game. When are you going to start doing it? I'm like, I'll show you. I went to the whiteboard and just charted it out for him. I'm like, don't worry, it's all going to happen. And he was, of course, the producer who was supposed to be in charge of all that, and he had no clue, so there was no reason to educate him all that deeply about it. But yeah, I mean, I was recording live orchestra within the last 2 weeks of working on Reach, because I knew that's the part that I knew it was a totally known quantity. I know how to score. I know how to like orchestrate. I know how to get the players in. I know how to mix. I know how to cut the music up. I know what I had planned. And I know that when it comes down, I needed the levels to be playable before I could implement music. Making a game is like making a multi-layered cake. And you got to cook several layers, and you got to mix the batter up, and you got to cook the cakes, and I'm the frosting guy. I'm the one who's supposed to make the frosting. and I can't frost a cake that isn't baked. I would say, look, I know you guys want to see the frosting, but I can't put frosting on raw cake batter. I need to have a cooked cake. I'll put the right frosting on at the right moment, but it's going to be at the end. The cake has to have cooled down and has to be solid, and then I'll frost it. That didn't always go over real well with the powers that be, but I still believe that's the right way to do it. People who insist that these composers write a bunch of music ahead of time, I can always tell. I play the game and I can tell this music, it doesn't fit the game because it was written ahead of the game. It's, it's the wrong frosting put on at the wrong time.
I was thinking of Mick Gordon.
Well,
that
there
whole
you go.
situation with Id.
Yeah.
The expected completed music tracks. Like, was it years before the game came out or something like that? It's just insane.
It's one of these things where I've never understood why other developers and publishers don't look at what is already successful and say, okay, well, how did you guys do it? Like, to me, the Halo series was so successful that other developers and publishers should have said, how did you guys do that? And we could have said, this is how you do it. This is the order of the process. But they don't. They believe that they know better. And I'm like, why do you think you know better than something that's successful? That's what I never understood. And every one of the composers out there, all of my composer friends in the game industry are, to a person, all the way frustrated with how they're asked to create for these game projects. They have to do things too early. They're not involved in the actual design of the game. They don't know how things are going to get used. They're just sort of outside, given a list of, things to do musically, and then they do them and they throw them over the transom, and they get the game a year later and they go, oh, is that how you use that music? That sucks. I mean, you would be shocked at how many of these really talented, amazing composers are not integrally involved in the process, and they should be. They're the ones who know the best about how music affects people's emotions. And instead, it's like, suits and producers who think they know better.
That's a great message to up and coming devs. It's inspiring.
This is where I think the indies have it over everybody else, because the indies are smaller teams.
Very true.
And if they're smart, they're going to respect the individual creatives. You're going to respect your art director to make truly creative artistic decisions, your design director to make gameplay decisions, and your audio director to make all the music and audio decisions. And like at that director level, you all have to work well together. But I shouldn't go to Marcus Lado and say, hey, I think the lighting in this scene is off, or I think that, Master Chief should be an inch shorter, or, the color is wrong. Any more than he should come to me and say, Marty, I think this should be a euphonium instead of a tuba.
On the topic of Marcus Leto, though, I think at some point I remember you mentioning that for the music of Halo Reach, he said that one of the instruments that he wanted incorporated was timpani or something along those lines, and that was kind of like the starting point.
I think, let me think how that worked. There was something about Marcus wanting, I'm not even sure if it was, I don't think it was Reach, believe it or not. I think it was Halo 3. There was an opening, the opening cinematic I had rough scored, and I had a rough video of what was going to happen in Engine. And I played it for Marcus, and he said, wow, you know, I think that, wouldn't it be cool if a timpani came in right there? And I was like, well, yeah, Marcus, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. So I don't have a hard and fast rule, especially when you work with somebody a long time. Like, people making specific music suggestions are, maybe I don't always welcome that, but there are times when I have welcomed it and it's been the right decision. I'm trying to remember what, you know, Marcus was obviously project lead and creative director of Reach. I don't remember what sort of things that he suggested for that, but we had a really good working relationship. So the one thing we knew right from the beginning with Reach was that it was, you know, we use the term darker and grittier. It was not the same story. And believe it or not, I'm the guy who I did actually come up with from the beginning, you know, the end, because I kept, when we were working on the story and the general idea of Reach, I was like, wow, this is like the Titanic. Like, you go to see the Titanic and you know the ship's not going to make it, right? Unless you're completely out of touch. So we knew that the fans who knew the story of Halo and Halo Reach knew that none of these guys were going to make it. And what we wanted to do was continue to make you feel like there was hope until the very end. And that was a really different kind of project to work on, because each character had to have its own unique death, and it was a much more serious project than the other three Halos.
The music as well carried a lot of the emotional weight as well, and it being so different to the other Halo games, I think really helps to set it apart. Because especially compared to how like a lot of the Halo soundtracks started, like with Halo 1 and 2 and 3, there was a lot of use of like the EMU Proteus and the percussion and the 5080. I'll have to send you a photo, actually. I've got some of them sitting next to me here. But
you got a 5080?
I do, yeah. But and then in Reach, it's like a very different sort of soundscape, you know, aside from a few sort of callbacks here and there.
Cool. I was a little bit afraid that it was too similar to the other things. It was fun because when I worked on, like, Halo 1, 2, and 3 was like one, you know, to me it was like in the big picture form, structure-wise, it was A, B, A prime. So it's a return. Halo 3 is a return to a lot of the themes that you heard in Halo 1, but sort of bigger and enhanced and maybe sometimes going in newer directions. But that was a closed off trilogy, right? And then Halo 3 ODST, it was like, oh, this is great. There's no Master Chief, there's no Cortana. You know, you're not on a Halo. You know, it's a completely different story. It's the ODST story, takes place at night in a couple of days. And of course, Joe Staten is like, no, it's going to be a film noir story. It needs to have a jazzy score. And I'm like, jazzy? You got to be kidding me. Really? Halo jazzy? And then immediately I'm like, that's genius. That's brilliant. Of course. Thanks, Joe. So, you know, I wouldn't have probably thought that if it hadn't been for Joe's suggestion. So got to give Joe credit for the jazzy score. Now, he didn't write any of it, but I'll take credit for the writing. He did say, the one thing he said was like, how about a Miles Davis muted trumpet? And I'm like, yeah, no, I'd rather do smoky sax. So it's funny. I've heard Joe talk about that, and he'll say he suggested smoky sax. And so that's the way he remembers it. I remember that he said Miles Davis, but and I said smoky sax. So whatever, it's fine. It worked out. But with Reach, the one thing I knew that I needed to do, and you know, Andrew, you might get this better than some, but of course, you know, a jazz score there's a jazzy thing. So I have a jazz harmonic palette to some extent. And then Halo 1, 2, and 3 was all Dorian, right? It was all Dorian mode. It was all this church mode Dorian. But when, we started talking about Reach being kind of populated by Hungarians or whatever, Eastern Europeans, and the planet itself was a character in the game, I thought, okay, well, I can't do Dorian anymore. So I just decided that an Eastern Europe scale is more Phrygian. So Phrygian is still minor, but it has a lowered second degree. Phrygian-based music just gives you a different, slightly ethnic feel. You can go in a whole bunch of other sort of more quote-unquote exotic directions with Phrygian. So I was very comfortable knowing that if that was the harmonic palette I'd be in, it would automatically be different enough from the Halo trilogy that I could do something that stood out. Believe it or not, I had written a bunch of music for Reach, and then somebody in leadership came to me and said, well, Marty, where's the monk chant? And I said, well, I don't want a monk chant. I don't want the monks to chant in this thing. And they were like, but yeah, but like for marketing and it's Halo, it's still got to feel Halo-y. And so that's why the very beginning, I think, of the overture is da 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 da, and then that's it. It goes after that opening.
Oh yeah.
I put that in late and developed a piece around that, so that I knew that the first thing you would hear, or the very opening logo for trailers and stuff, would basically say da 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 da, and that would be okay. It's Halo. Now where is it going? And then it goes into something else. It's a good idea for the fans and the players to know this is still in the Halo universe. But if you think about ODST, I don't think there's, that's not true. There's some point where I do a callback to some Halo themes. Is it only at the end?
I think there's one piece that plays. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Where I know where it happens in the campaign, where you're playing as Buck for I think it's the second mission, and you're running after to try and find Dare where her pod has crashed. And there's a callback to a piece from Halo 2 in there. I think it might be it's like the High Charity Suite or something else. The da, 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 but it's got a bunch of drums and stuff playing with it. It kind of drives it a bit more, but...
Well, whatever it was, I did it completely on purpose.
I'll just say, as a fan, when you hear Reach's soundtrack, it still sounds like Halo. Like, even if you didn't have that bit, the callback that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's still just such a distinctly recognizable style, I feel like.
People have asked me, they're like, oh, yeah, we heard your, the version of Silent Night. It sounds like Halo. And I'm like, oh, no, it just basically probably sounds like me to some extent. It's just, I can't help myself. Yeah. Like whatever sort of the way my mind works musically ends up showing up. Mike knows the way I compose. I know the way Mike composes. I did pieces that I wanted to make Mike think like, hey, I should have done that. And then he would do pieces that I would like, no, why did you do that? I was supposed to do that. So, yeah, you end up sort of over time, maybe just having some comfortable ways of writing music that you don't realize is going to become part of your own personal style.
Idiosyncrasies, I guess. Yeah.
Is there a mistake left over in the Halo games that you shipped that still drives you up the wall to this day?
Well, I mean, the most obvious one is that cave is not a natural formation. That is just... I mean, we knew it while we were doing it. We finally got that. This is one of those problems with having, recording dialogue or doing stuff before the levels are actually fully baked. And by the time we saw where that line needed to be said and what the actual structure looked like, we were like, what is that? I mean, we were fully aware, but we were out of time. We were just plain out of time. It's like, well, we're just going to have to ship it that way. I think the to war line is also something that drives me crazy. Like that, I remember because, I was directing there's a Destiny line too, which is, I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain. I remember sitting at the table read for that line, and I was the one reading it for the first time. And then I looked up around the table like, really, guys, really? So I guess most of the things that bother me are little lines of dialogue. Oh, there's one part that I think a lot of people don't know, which actually does bother me. So in Halo 3, after you've killed Prophet of Truth, you and the Arbiter go down, and you're standing there. You're seeing the brand new Delta Halo being reformed and coming up in front of you. This very emotional and powerful scene, right? And then Guilty Spark flies over to you. And I forget what he says. This is what's funny about it. He says something, but it's a line that he says, and then as he flies away, it's basically his instruction that you need to follow him to Delta Halo, to the new Halo, because everything's going to take place there. But we made the mistake. So in the game engine, you can have audio that's emitted from a 3D space or a character, so that if the character is over to your left, the audio comes out from the left. And then if the character moves away from you, the audio gets quieter because it's physically further away. But then in a lot of cinematics, we don't attach audio to the cinematic characters. We just do that as a separate mix and fake it, right? So if Guilty Spark is flying away, we would just turn him down in the mix. But in this one, we made the mistake of attaching his lines to the actual 343 Guilty Spark character. And so as he's flying away and he says his very last line is really important, but you don't hear it. You never hear it because he has gone out of range to hear what he's supposed to say. And we didn't pick up that mistake until after we were shipping. And we're like, wait, what happened to that line? It's like, oh, it's gone. But it was one of those things where we felt bad that didn't get played. And then in Halo 1, there's a reoccurring bug that happens periodically. If you play the last level the wrong way after you start that, what is it, Wildcat reaction, whatever that thing is, where you're shooting before the Warthog run.
Yeah.
So when you go back, if you do something slightly out of order, there's a low drone that plays and it never turns off. And it's supposed to turn off, with the music that comes on after you've completed the mission and after you get to the Warthog. But if not, that low drone will play all the way through the ending cutscene. And every once in a while, I'll see that bug shows up, and it drives me crazy. So because it's just so not right. And I didn't notice it. It was my mistake, obviously. I did something where I made it so there was a trigger volume that could be avoided and a piece of music would never turn off. But it can still happen. I think I saw it happen on the Master Chief Collection. So
yeah, I might have actually run into that bug maybe once or twice before playing Halo CE, now that you come to mention it. Because yeah, it's after you blow up the generators or whatever it is on the Pillar of Autumn, and before you ride the elevator up to the vehicle bay with the Warthogs, and yeah, there's that low kind of string that just kind of keeps going. Yeah.
Goes and goes. I'm like, no, that was supposed to be just a little transitional moment. It was supposed to happen, after you do this thing, then the low drone comes in, and then it turns off subtly and nicely, and as it transitions into some other piece. And all of a sudden, it just stays all the way through the end. So even when Cortana's going, just dust and echoes, I'm still hearing this dissonant low drone that I don't want there. Drives me crazy. And it seems like it was the largest grenade ever, right? When he's like holding that grenade in his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Where did that come from? It's like a giant basketball or something.
Yeah, in one of Chief's pouches on the front of his belt. They're bigger on the inside. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, because that was actually one of the things that kind of worked for a while, but we weren't able to implement. And that is, you have cinematic characters and then you have the in-game character. And so you're playing as Master Chief, which of course is not necessarily a complete character, because you don't need that. You're first person. So all you need to know is here's his hands and here's his arms and he's taking up this space. But then there were always higher res models for all the cinematics, but the cinematics are all in engine. So there always has to be a very creative way of swapping out models, deleting the character, the in-game character, and replacing it with the cinematic character. So we have to swap those models out for every cinematic. But what bothered us for a long time was you just like if you just did a plasma grenade over on the wall and did some plasma scoring with a plasma rifle over on the right, when the cinematic came up, that scoring would be there. But your weapon would change. The weapon that you brought into the scene with you was no longer the weapon that you had, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we fixed that by Halo 2 and 3. But with Halo 1, you run into the scene with a plasma pistol, and then the cinematic starts, and it's Master Chief with an assault rifle. And you're like, why do I have an assault rifle? And that used to bug me. It actually broke the immersion for me and we didn't want to ship that way, but there was some technical reason why we didn't have time to fix that.
The funny thing about that is in Halo 1, the cutscenes, if there was like an object there, like a vehicle, like a Banshee, and you flew it in, it would still be there.
Everything else remained the same, but because we swapped out character models for cinematic models, we had to do the weapon. We had to just give the weapon whatever. It was almost always an assault rifle, I think.
There's the famous example of that where the opening cutscene of Two Betrayals, there's the moment where you have the assault rifle and Chief says that's not going to happen, and Spark says his line about, keep his head, dispose of the rest, and then suddenly you load into the mission and you got a plasma pistol.
Well, that was actually one of those gameplay things where it was too hard to take down the Sentinels with an assault rifle. So I think that was one of the designers just saying, we're just going to give you a plasma pistol. So it's like, take the hint, overcharge, you'll take the Sentinels down much faster.
Was that one of those Jamie last-minute changes?
Let's just pretend it is. I think it probably is. I'm trying to remember who was the designer on Assault on the Control Room. I think that was a Paul Breton level. Could have been Tyson. I don't know. I worked with all those guys. They were all of them were a blast.
Well, Tyson did the library, right?
Yeah, he did the library, but he also did the Maw. So, don't be too hard on him.
Well, I think we're something of library apologists in this group. Yeah, we did a whole episode of this podcast. Post your bad Halo takes, and we'll talk about them. And one of them was, the library is a good mission? What? And then we went on like a 20-minute talk about libraries are really prolific in literature and all this and stuff. It's like a metaphor. By the end of it, I came around to thinking, yeah, you know what? Maybe the library ain't so bad. Maybe it ain't too bad at all.
Well, I'm trying to remember. It would be fun to talk to Tyson again about that. I bet you Jamie remembers too. But we had better plans for the library mission than what it ended up being. There was more going back and get something about that central core area and doing cool other things. And somehow it was another one of those deals where we were running out of time. We couldn't implement the stuff we thought would be great. And so it's just sort of like, go up another floor and kill more people and more aliens, and then go up a floor and wait for Guilty Spark to do something. And it just got, even I remember thinking, really? We have to go up again? I think that's even why the subtitles, the chapter headings, isn't there one where it says, don't make me go up another floor or something like that? Or no.
I don't want to ride the elevator.
Yeah, I don't want to ride the elevator. That was because we all felt the same way in the studio. It's like, you got to be kidding me. We got to do another one of these? And it was like, yeah, it's too late to change anything. So, but I don't want to ride the elevator. That was like, we were saying that in the studio. So it'd be interesting to try to remember who wrote most of the chapter titles. I'm sure some of it was Joe Staten. Some of it was probably some of the designers. Like for example, I know Jamie Griesmer came up with Silent Cartographer, and I think he came up with the name Flawless Cowboy. That was his gamer tag at one point. Because he thought it sounded like what the aliens would have a word for Master Chief, but it's sort of like translating a Japanese phrase, and it doesn't translate very well.
What advice would you offer to someone who is maybe looking to make it into the realm of composing music or doing sound design for video games?
Well, I would say for as much as you can get away with doing things with your gut and instincts, I would still say that anytime you can get education in music, in theory, in composition, orchestration, production techniques, digital audio workstations, as much education as you can get is never a waste. But once you have some chops, right? Once you're able to like work yourself into, you feel comfortable composing, you feel comfortable with being, an environment and enhancing the story or enhancing a mood, or once you're comfortable with those basics, then what you have to do is find other people that want to work with you. And just making a demo reel and, shipping it out to a bunch of people on a mailing list or whatever, however you do it on the internet, most likely that's not going to be successful. So find some friends, an artist, a designer, an animator, a writer. Find some friends who actually have some cool ideas and want to make something. And, maybe all you're doing is making, a modded level of some other existing game, and they don't have any expertise with sound design and music. And you say, I can do that. And then like, I know like Austin Wintory, who, wrote the music for Journey and a bunch of other things. I think he's got a great attitude, which is, always make friends, because the worst thing that can happen is that you don't get any work out of it, but you still have a friend. But the best thing that can happen is when your friends go off to some other thing and suddenly they have a project and they remember you and they remember what you can do. And then now you got a gig. That's the best way. It's who who you've worked with, do the game jams, do the modded stuff, stay in touch with people who, don't have your expertise, and you don't have their expertise, and so that you working together with that other person are going to make something that the two of you by yourselves couldn't make. So you don't need a huge team to make some pretty good stuff right now. The tools are all there, and all these tools are basically free. You can work in Unreal, you can work with Wise, you can get a small, digital audio workstation. You can, as you guys know, you guys are content creators. Like, so instead of creating content for YouTube, create content for a game.
Final question. The soundtracks you've composed, especially Halo's, they've left an indelible mark on popular culture. They're still being discussed today by nerds such as myself. They've helped to inspire people to become composers or break into the industry, like we've talked about people like Neo and so many others like Jafet Meza and Alex G and all the rest, still making covers and rearrangements of your work. How does it make you feel as a composer to have a legacy like that?
First of all, it's completely unexpected and surprising. So when you're first starting off working, you certainly are not working towards a legacy or a future of you. A lot of times you just think, okay, I'm writing this and producing this for this moment, and then 2 weeks goes by and I got to do something else and something new. You don't think these things have legs. We didn't think Halo was going to have legs. The game itself, we thought, if somebody's still playing it a year after we ship it, that would have been insane to even expect that. So to have, the world's biggest online choir sing the Halo Monk chant and concerts going on and people still analyzing the stuff, it's a huge surprise and it's a huge honor. I don't know what to expect beyond this. Like, will it still be interesting, 5 years from now or 10 years from now? It's hard to fathom that could happen. So it's a surprise. It's an honor. It makes me feel really good. I especially feel good when I hear from people who say, yeah, I grew up with this, listening to your music, and it affected me, and so I took up the cello, and now I'm a cello major, or I'm in an orchestra, or I'm a professional musician. But when I hear stories like that, I'm like, wow, that is great. Good luck, right? Super satisfying. It's great to hear. People say, oh, you probably hear this all the time. And I'm like, no, go ahead. Say it again. Whatever it is you're going to say. If I've heard it before, I don't care. I love hearing that you've been affected in some way by something that I was part of creating. That's just a very satisfying, wonderful thing. So thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you for all the music and for everything else.
And for coming on as well.
Well, it was fun talking to you guys. I appreciate you youngsters having a lot of nerdy knowledge about something that we worked on 20 years ago. It's a blast.